You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right? When the papers in your mailbox look official, the men at your door sound authoritative, but deep down, your gut screams that something's off. That's exactly where my story begins. And believe me, this is not your average tale of neighborhood disputes. This is the nightmarish reality of what happens when organized criminals disguise themselves as a homeowners association. And it all started with a knock at my door. My name is Galvin Preston. I'm a 38-year-old single father and a former Navy SEAL. These days, I work in cybersecurity, trying to keep corporations safe from hackers and online thieves. But none of that training prepared me for the kind of predators that showed up in my own suburban neighborhood. See, the Navy taught me how to fight wars overseas. What it didn't teach me was that sometimes the most dangerous battles are the ones fought in quiet cul-de-sacs, right in front of white picket fences. It was a bright, ordinary Saturday morning in Silver Creek, a small, tight-knit community tucked just outside Denver. My 8-year-old daughter, Erica, was in the backyard, carefully arranging the rocks from her ever-growing collection. She's obsessed with geology fossils, gemstones, even chunks of gravel become treasures in her eyes. Her laughter was the soundtrack of my morning, until a sharp knock on the door pulled me inside. Standing on my porch were 3 men in crisp suits, carrying clipboards and thick folders. Their expressions were stern, their tone businesslike. The tallest one introduced himself as Edward Dawson, claiming to be the president of the newly formed Silver Creek Homeowners Association. The other 2, Marcus Reed and Tyler Watts, nodded along like hired muscle. Dawson wasted no time. "Mr. Preston," he said smoothly, "we need to discuss your non-compliance with HOA guidelines. You've violated several ordinances regarding property maintenance and landscaping." I blinked. "What HOA?" I asked flatly. Silver Creek had never had one. In fact, our neighborhood prided itself on being free of the bureaucracy and pettiness that came with them. Dawson didn't flinch. He pulled out glossy, official-looking documents stamped with seals and signatures. "The residents voted last month," he said. "It's all legal. You'll need to bring your property up to standard immediately or face fines." Something about the whole act reeked of fraud. The papers looked polished, but the dates didn't match. The signatures were from people I knew personally, neighbors who never would have agreed to this. And yet Dawson delivered his lines with the confidence of a man who had done this before. His eyes drifted toward my daughter's swing set, toward Erica herself still playing in the yard. That's when my blood ran cold. This wasn't just about money. This was about intimidation. I'd seen that look before, overseas, when insurgents scanned a village for its weakest points. The HOA scam was just a mask. These men weren't community volunteers, they were predators, and they'd chosen the wrong neighborhood. I played it calm. I signed nothing. I promised to look into the documents and shut the door. But inside, my instincts were already shifting gears. My military training never really leaves me. And the first rule is simple: know your enemy. Over the next few days, I studied them. I noticed their black Suburban circling the block at odd hours. I caught Marcus posing as a crossing guard outside Erica's school, phone in hand, directing traffic while recording the routines of parents and kids. And I found a listening device hidden inside my mailbox. That was the moment I knew we weren't dealing with pushy salesmen. We were up against an organized crime ring. I confided first in Felix, my next-door neighbor and a retired Army intelligence officer. He wasn't surprised. "These scams are spreading," he said grimly. "They create fake HOAs, pressure homeowners with bogus fines, and flip properties to investors at rock-bottom prices. But targeting your daughter, that's new and dangerous." His eyes hardened. "We'll handle this smart, no mistakes." The hardest part was pretending life was normal for Erica's sake. She had no idea of the storm building around us. I still took her to school, still listened to her chatter about rocks and dinosaurs. But at night, I barely slept, scanning surveillance feeds, documenting everything. Every fake document, every suspicious license plate, every late-night drive-by. I built a dossier thick enough to bury them in evidence. But the law is trickier, and TID fraud doesn't always land serious charges. As Felix reminded me, we need them to cross the line. Then we'll have them so. I set the bait. First, I upgraded my home security, but not in obvious ways. The visible system stayed, blinking lights and yard signs. But hidden throughout the house, I installed covert cameras feeding directly to a hardened server in my basement with cloud backup. I staged valuables near the windows bags that looked full of electronics but actually contained GPS trackers and die packs. I even rigged the ground floor with subtle obstacles, a slippery rug, a misplaced bench, choke points that gave me the advantage in close quarters. And upstairs, in Erica's room, I placed a child-sized mannequin under her unicorn blanket, blonde wig peeking from the pillow, a half-finished glass of chocolate milk on her desk. To anyone peeking in, it looked like she was sound asleep. Meanwhile, I acted the part. Within earshot of their hidden microphone, I spoke loudly on the phone about working late Thursday night. I complained to a neighbor about my broken security system. I made sure they believed my house and my daughter would be vulnerable. All they had to do was take the bait, and they did. 3 nights later, at exactly 2 a.m., my silent perimeter alarm buzzed. Through the garage peephole, I watched the black Suburban roll up, headlights off. Dawson, Marcus, and Tyler slipped out, dressed in dark clothing, moving like men who'd done this many times before. Tyler carried an electronic device for bypassing alarms. Marcus a crowbar, Dawson a flashlight, and those same forged HOA documents. My earpiece crackled. Felix and two other trusted neighbors, Jim, a former Marine sniper, and Pete, a retired Air Force security officer, were in position, watching. "They're at your door," Felix whispered. "Showtime." I crouched in the shadows, heart steady, mind focused. This wasn't combat overseas. This was my home, my daughter, my neighborhood. And these men were about to learn what happens when you mistake a father for easy prey. The front door creaked as Marcus worked the crowbar against the lock. Tyler whispered something about the cameras, but Dawson brushed it off. "He's careless," he said confidently. "Ex-military types think no one would dare mess with them. This'll be quick, in and out." His arrogance was almost insulting, but it also confirmed one thing. They underestimated me. That was my advantage. I stayed perfectly still in the darkened living room, every sense alive. I could hear the faint hum of Tyler's device as he scrambled the alarm system, not realizing I'd built redundancies. The fake panel by the door was offline exactly as they expected, but the hidden system beneath the staircase was very much alive, recording every second and relaying it to Felix and the others outside. As soon as the lock gave way, I slipped silently into the kitchen, where I had the best view of the ground floor. The men entered like predators on familiar ground. Dawson flipped through the forged HOA documents, muttering, "He'll have no defense once we seize the property. His kid will be leverage if he resists." My stomach tightened. I'd heard enough, but I forced myself to wait. Let them incriminate themselves further. Marcus moved toward the stairs, flashlight beam skimming across family photos on the wall. "Kid's room must be up here," he whispered. That was my cue. I tapped the side of my watch 3 times. Outside, Felix acknowledged with a short buzz. Backup was ready. Marcus pushed Erica's bedroom door open. His light fell on the mannequin under the blanket. He smirked. "She's out cold." That smirk vanished when the blanket shifted, releasing a faint hiss of compressed air. The hidden trigger in the mannequin's frame activated, spraying his face with bright blue dye and pepper spray residue. Marcus staggered back, choking eyes watering. What the hell? That was the break I needed. I stepped out of the kitchen shadows, shotgun leveled. "Game over," I barked. My voice was steady, controlled, but my blood pounded in my ears. Dawson spun toward me, his flashlight beam catching my face. For the first time, his confident smirk faltered. "Drop it," I ordered. Tyler froze, hands half raised, crowbar slipping from his grip. Marcus was still coughing, clawing at his eyes. Dawson, though, wasn't so easily rattled. He raised the folder of forged documents like it was a shield. "You're making a mistake, Preston. These are legal proceedings. You're interfering with an HOA audit." I almost laughed. "Audits don't happen at 2 in the morning with crowbars and hacking devices." I motioned with the barrel. "On your knees, all of you." For a moment, I thought Dawson might comply, but then he lunged not at me, but toward the stairs, shouting, "Grab the kid." His mistake. The second his foot hit the step, Felix fired a warning shot from outside, the crack echoing through the night. Glass shattered as a round punched cleanly through the porch light inches from Dawson's head. He froze, hands trembling. I advanced, weapon steady. "You're surrounded. My neighbors are veterans, law enforcement, and they've got this place locked down, tighter than Fort Knox. You picked the wrong house." Tyler slowly sank to his knees, hands behind his head. Marcus, half blind and wheezing, followed. Dawson held out a moment longer, jaw clenched, before dropping the forged documents and raising his hands. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with."
"Yeah,"
I said coldly. "Neither do you." Within seconds, Felix and the others stormed in, securing the intruders with zip ties. Jim covered the door with his rifle. Pete checked the hall for any other threats. I finally lowered my shotgun, but the adrenaline still surged through me. Erica's mannequin lay on the bed, her real self, safe and sound at my sister's house across town. I glanced at the half-finished glass of chocolate milk on the desk and felt a surge of relief. My little girl would never know just how close the danger had come. Felix crouched beside Dawson, flipping through the forged papers. "These are good, too good. This isn't some small-time scam. They've got resources, connections, maybe even insiders at the county recorder's office." He looked up at me grimly. "We need to dig deeper." We handed the criminals over to the sheriff's deputies, who arrived minutes later. But even as the flashing red and blue lights filled the street, Dawson's words echoed in my head. "You don't know who you're dealing with." He wasn't bluffing. The deputies took our statements, bagged the evidence, and hauled the 3 men away. Most of the neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering, but only a few knew the truth. I didn't tell Erica. All she needed to know was that Dad had handled it. But in the quiet hours after, once the adrenaline faded, I sat in my living room staring at the broken front door. This was just round 1. The next morning confirmed it. When I opened my email, I found dozens of new notices from the supposed HOA fines for everything from lawn height to mailbox paint. Each one carried threads of liens and foreclosure. The timing was no coincidence. Dawson might be in custody, but his network was still active. The fake HOA wasn't just a scam, it was a machine, built to crush families one house at a time. I forwarded everything to Felix. He replied within minutes, "Meet me tonight. We need a plan." That evening, as the sun dipped below the Rockies, Felix spread a map of Silver Creek across his kitchen table. Pins marked houses recently foreclosed, all under suspicious circumstances. "They've been at this for months," he said grimly. "Families pressured into paying fake fines. Those who resisted, their homes were seized through forged liens and quick auctions. Investors snapped them up for pennies. It's organized theft on a massive scale." I studied the map. At least 6 homes had already fallen, 6 families uprooted, and we'd only stopped them from taking the 7th. Anger burned in my chest. This wasn't just about me or Erica anymore. This was about our whole community. Felix pointed to a cluster of addresses. "We need to hit their base. These scams aren't random, they operate out of a central hub. I've traced Dawson's calls to a property downtown. Looks like an abandoned office building, but I guarantee it's where they're running the operation." He leaned in, eyes sharp. "We take down the head, or this won't end." I nodded slowly. The soldier in me was ready for action, but the father in me hesitated. "What about Erica?" I asked quietly. "If I push too hard, they'll target her again." Felix didn't flinch. "That's why we end it fast, clean, no half measures." I knew he was right. The longer we waited, the stronger they'd get. And deep down, I understood something else. This wasn't just my fight. Every neighbor who paid a bogus fine, every family forced out of their home, they were counting on someone to stand up. Like it or not, that someone was me. So I made a promise. Not just to Felix, but to myself. I'd dismantle this fake HOA piece by piece, no matter how high up the corruption went. And if they wanted a war in the suburbs, well, they'd picked the wrong veteran. The battle for Silver Creek had only just begun. The next few days were a blur of tension and planning. Outwardly, Silver Creek looked the same: kids riding bikes, sprinklers hissing on well-trimmed lawns, neighbors waving politely as they collected their mail. But beneath the surface, fear rippled through the community. Whispers spread about the men who had been arrested, about the phony HOA letters still showing up in mailboxes. Some neighbors were convinced it was just a misunderstanding. Others were too frightened to speak out. And then there were those like me and Felix who knew the truth. This was no misunderstanding. This was a takeover. Felix spent hours poring over phone records, email headers, and county property filings. My background in cybersecurity made me the perfect partner. We weren't just looking at forged documents anymore. We were uncovering a digital paper trail. Dozens of properties across Colorado had been seized under similar circumstances. The names on the filings changed. The shell companies rotated, but the pattern was unmistakable. Dawson and his crew weren't lone wolves. They were part of a network. Late one evening, Felix slid a manila folder across his kitchen table. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. Inside were photographs of men and women entering and leaving a rundown office building on the edge of downtown Denver. The building looked abandoned: peeling paint, broken windows, a faded "for lease" sign half hanging from the roof. But the people coming and going were dressed in suits, carrying briefcases, sometimes escorted by men in dark vehicles. "This is their command center," Felix explained. "Everything runs through here." I studied the photos. Something about the routine struck me: same black SUVs, same security patterns. It wasn't just a fake it was an organized crime syndicate with corporate discipline. "We'll need evidence," I said. "Enough to bury them in court. Otherwise, they'll wiggle out of this like Dawson tried." Felix nodded. "We'll go in quiet. Cameras, audio, the works." We exposed their whole operation, not just the foot soldiers. That night, after Erica was asleep at my sister's house, I prepped gear I hadn't touched in years. A small set of night vision goggles, miniature pinhole cameras, portable hard drives with encrypted backups. My SEAL training came flooding back, muscle memory guiding my hands as I packed. But this wasn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This was Denver. This was home. We staged near the building just after midnight. Jim covered from a rooftop 2 blocks over, his sniper scope scanning the perimeter. Pete monitored police frequencies from a van, ready to intercept if things went sideways. Felix and I slipped through a side alley, scaling a rusted fire escape that creaked under our boots. The 3rd-floor window was cracked just enough to pry open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and dust. But what we found beyond the broken hallway shocked us. Rows of cubicles filled the space, each one stacked with file boxes, fax machines, and computers humming softly. On the walls hung whiteboards filled with property addresses, deadlines, and names. Lots of names. Families from all over the state. Sticky notes marked delinquent, lien filed, or worst of all, eviction complete. My chest tightened as I realized we were standing inside the beating heart of the scam. Felix snapped photos rapidly, whispering, "This is it. This is the mother lode." He moved toward a filing cabinet labeled Silver Creek. I kept watch, ears straining for any sound beyond the hum of electronics. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. I signaled Felix, and we ducked behind a partition just as two men entered the office. Laughing in low voices, one of them carried a laptop bag, the other a box of files. "Dawson really screwed the pooch," the taller one muttered. "Should have kept it clean. Now we've got the sheriff sniffing around." "Relax," the other said. "The higher-ups already posted bail. By the end of the week, he'll be out. Then we push harder. If Silver Creek resists, we'll make an example out of Preston." No one defies the association and walks away. Felix's eyes met mine in the dim light. "They're talking about me." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay still. Acting now would blow the operation. We needed their words on record. I subtly tapped the recorder clipped inside my jacket, praying it caught every syllable. The men dumped the files on a desk and left as casually as they'd arrived. When the door shut behind them, I exhaled slowly. Felix retrieved the Silver Creek folder and slid it into his pack. "We've got enough to prove intent," he whispered. "Now we get out." But fate rarely makes it that simple. As we retraced our steps toward the window, motion sensors flickered to life. A piercing alarm split the silence. Red lights flashed across the office, and somewhere deep in the building, doors slammed. "Move," Felix barked. We sprinted through the cubicle maze, files clutched tight, hearts hammering. Down the fire escape, across the Elijah's voice crackled in my earpiece. "3 SUVs incoming, fast. They know you're there." We dove into Pete's van just as headlights swung around the corner. Pete gunned the engine, tires screeching against the asphalt. Black vehicles roared after us, closing fast. Jim's sniper fire cracked once, twice, forcing them to swerve, buying us precious seconds, but the chase didn't end until we hit the interstate, weaving through traffic until the SUVs finally peeled off, melting into the night. Back at Felix's, we spread the stolen documents across his dining room table. Names, signatures, forged seals, fraudulent deeds. It was overwhelming. Proof that dozens of families had been victimized, some already dispossessed of everything they owned. Silver Creek was just the next domino. I sat heavily in a chair, exhaustion washing over me. "This isn't just a scam," I muttered. "It's systemic. They've got people on the inside, county clerks, maybe even judges. That's how they're pulling this off." Felix nodded grimly. "And Dawson's just middle management. There's someone higher, someone pulling the strings. That's who we need." The room fell silent except for the rustle of papers. I thought about Erica, about her laughter in the backyard, about the innocents I was fighting to protect. These men weren't just stealing homes. They were stealing peace, safety, trust, the very fabric of our neighborhoods. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity: I wouldn't stop until the entire operation was dismantled. When dawn broke, Silver Creek looked the same as ever. But for me, nothing was the same. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a soldier again. And the battlefield was my own community. The war against the fake HOA had entered a new phase, and the stakes had never been higher. The moment the three men sat tied on my living room floor, the dynamic shifted. What started as brute intimidation had become undeniable evidence. The cameras had caught every move in unforgiving detail: the crowbar at the lock, the whispered plan to take the kid, Tyler's frantic attempts to film a child's bedroom, Marcus' stabbing lunge, and Dawson's nervous, rehearsed.com. It was a perfect mosaic of guilt we couldn't ignore, nor should we. Neighbors poured into the yard as word spread. People who'd been afraid to speak up now stood shoulder to shoulder. Carol brought hot coffee. Kids watched wide-eyed from behind grown legs. It wasn't theater. It was collective relief, the kind that comes when a long-simmering, ugly truth finally shows its face. Someone shouted suggestions. Someone else recorded the scene on their phone. The impromptu crowd was a living record, another layer of witnesses that would make the story impossible to bury. Felix called Detective James Rodriguez himself. Jim had been watching the HOA scams for months, an investigator who'd been frustrated at the way complex, cross-jurisdictional frauds evaporated into paperwork. When he arrived and saw the video, he didn't just take notes. His jaw tightened. "This is bigger than a local con," he said quietly, flipping through the printouts. "This ties into cases I've been tracking in other states. We need federal assistance." He radioed in a request for the FBI liaison and wrapped the immediate arrests into a packet. Hard drives, forged documents, identification for the three men, and my detailed dossier showing the money trail. Dawson didn't last long under pressure. Left alone with Felix and Jim for a brief stretch, the man unraveled. He confessed, not politely, not smoothly, but in messy, frightened bursts. He named names, dates, payments. He spoke of Benedict Griffith and Apex Investments, a set of shell companies, offshore accounts, and payoff schematics designed to keep transactions just messy enough to dissuade prosecutors. He described the playbook: fake HOA formation, targeted letters, inspections to get into homes, manufactured violations, crippling fines, then forced sales or ruined credit. The scale was worse than any of us had imagined. Within 24 hours, state and federal agents were on the scene. Task forces arrived with subpoenas, forensic teams hauled away servers, and IRS investigators started tracing transactions. It was a swarm of uniforms and badges that felt surreal, like bringing down a shark only to find an entire shoal of them. Under the surface, the local news, alerted by neighbors and my own encrypted Deadman emails, began to circle. What had been a terrified whisper around kitchen tables became reported fact on airwaves. Silver Creek was no longer some sleepy suburb, it was the epicenter of a criminal exposé. The charge sheet that followed was a long list: attempted kidnapping, breaking and entering, impersonation, racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering among them. Federal prosecutors moved fast. The evidence from the break-in, Tyler's recorded footage, Marcus' tattoos linking him to other crimes, Dawson's confessions, and the trove from the downtown office created a tight net. Apex Investments, Benedict Griffith, and several of their executives found themselves not merely accused but indicted. Griffith tried to run. He attempted to cross into Canada shortly after the raids, carrying a false passport and a duffel bag of cryptocurrency, an act that, biffo, in retrospect, looked like both desperation and arrogance. Border agents stopped him. The handoff to federal custody was clean and total. His empire collapsed in a week. Bank accounts froze. Corporate boards shuffled. Lawyers scrambled to minimize damage. The men who had walked our streets with fake authority were now in jailland. Their alleged puppet master was cuffed at the border. The courtroom spectacles that followed were ugly and decisive. Dawson, Marcus, and Tyler accepted plea deals when the prosecution offered huge leverage video evidence, financial records, and multiple witness statements that painted a replay too coherent to fight. Benedict Griffith, however, chose fight over flight. He was strategic and had resources, but the prosecution's case was built like a fortress. Federal investigators had pieced together bank transfers, shell company contracts, and recorded conversations showing Griffith's directives. At sentencing, the judge read a list of victims: families forced out of homes, retirees robbed of nest eggs, and a community stripped of trust. The phrase "calculated assault on the American dream" was used more than once. Griffith received a sentence that reflected not just his crimes but the scale and cruelty of the schemers behind bars: forfeiture of assets, and restitution orders to make victims whole where possible. But prison sentences and financial penalties only tell part of the story. The public exposure mattered most. Silver Creek's videos, news segments, and social media clips spread like wildfire. Across the country, neighborhoods recognized the pattern: sudden HOA letters, odd inspectors at odd hours, shell corporations appearing overnight. The press called it a nationwide racket. Legislatures took notice. I testified before a state committee, walked a room of lawmakers through the deception, and laid out how a regulatory blind spot allowed fake HOAs to flourish. Lawmakers responded with reform: stricter registration requirements for HOA formation, mandatory verification of board votes, and criminal penalties for impersonation and fraudulent liens. Cities and counties enhanced property record auditing, and civil remedies were expanded so victims could seek immediate injunctions against forged liens. Back in Silver Creek, we built something the scammers hadn't expected: a real neighborhood association, not an but a volunteer network focused on mutual aid and vigilance. Felix was elected, not as some overlord, but as a coordinator for block watches, a clearinghouse for suspicious mailings, and a shelter in times of crisis. We organized training sessions with local police on document verification and partnered with cybersecurity. Volunteers, people like me too, helped neighbors secure their digital lives. We created a small emergency fund to help victims fight fraudulent claims and retain lawyers. More importantly, we changed our culture. People who once shrugged off strange letters now compared notes. Neighbors who kept to themselves now watched each other's backs, and there was a moment that defined our community's anger and reclaiming of dignity: the Silver Creek Crawl. It started as an act of theater and justice. Faced with a trio of men whose arrogance had inflicted fear on our homes and families, the neighborhood collectively made a simple choice: force them to walk the long, uncomfortable route to the police station on their knees. The same humiliation they'd tried to impose on others. It was primal and public. The video clips of 3 men crawling down Maple Street, suits shredded, knees raw and bleeding, traveled faster than any official press release. Some called it vigilante justice. Others called it catharsis. For many of us, it was the exact message we needed to send: you do not terrorize this neighborhood. You do not mess with children here. Legally, those images complicated things in places. Some lawyers argued entrapment. Others called it a community response to a unique threat. For the district attorney, the videos were supplemental evidence of public outrage, but not the foundation of the prosecution. The court case relied on the hard records: forged documents, bank trails, recorded confessions, and eyewitness testimony. The community's actions, though emotionally satisfying, never replaced the need for indictments and sentencing. Still, watching those men crawl was one of the oddest, sweetest moments of vindication. I'd ever lived through. By the time the trials wrapped up and the penultimate plea deals were filed, Silver Creek began to breathe again. Victims received restitution checks, some modest, others substantial. Apex investments dissolved as creditors and regulators closed in. Local governments tightened the rules. And for a brief, quiet stretch, we could safely say that the worst of it was over. But the lesson lingered. Predators evolve. They find legal loopholes, they hide behind officialdom, and they prey on the polite. The difference this time was that a corner of suburbia woke up, and when it did, it fought with the precision of a trained operator and the fierce love of a father protecting his child. When the dust finally settled, Silver Creek was never the same. We had survived something. No neighborhood should ever face predators hiding behind official paperwork. Men who tried to use fear and bureaucracy as weapons. They'd walked our streets, smiled politely at our kids, then plotted in secret to strip us of everything. And yet, somehow, in the middle of that darkness, we found something stronger: unity. I'll never forget the night after Benedict Griffith was sentenced. The neighborhood gathered at the park under the soft glow of string lights. Kids ran around the swings, free again, while parents shared food and laughter without the shadow of suspicion. It wasn't a celebration in the loud sense. It was quieter, deeper, the relief of knowing that the nightmare was behind us. Felix raised a glass of sweet tea and said, "We've proven what happens when ordinary people stand together." They tried to steal our homes, but instead, they built our community. For me, it was bittersweet. Erica sat on my lap, her head against my chest, too young to understand the full scope of what had happened. She only knew that Dad had kept the bad guys away. That was enough for her. But inside, I carried the weight of every family who hadn't been as lucky, those who'd lost their houses in other towns, who hadn't caught the fraud in time. That pain fueled me. It made me vow that our story wouldn't just be one community's fight. It would be a warning for the entire country. In the months that followed, my life took a strange turn. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawmakers asked me to testify about the loopholes that allowed fake HOAs to thrive. Even Homeland Security reached out, interested in how organized crime was adapting to suburban America. I never asked for the spotlight, but I realized it wasn't about MIT, it was about Erica, about every child who deserved to grow up in a safe neighborhood, free from predators and suits. The reforms spread faster than I ever imagined. States across the U.S. began passing bills requiring strict verification before any HOA could legally operate. County offices installed digital tracking systems to prevent forged liens. Hotlines were established so homeowners could report suspicious letters or visits. Awareness campaigns taught people to question authority that showed up unannounced. Slowly, the predator's playbook stopped working. But I also learned something personal. The battle against scams and corruption isn't fought just in courts or legislatures. It's fought in the quiet choices we make as neighbors. When Carol checks on the single mom 2 houses down. When Jim sharpens his eyes from the rooftop at night just to make sure kids are safe. When Pete teaches a workshop on spotting phishing emails at the local library. These aren't big, flashy moves. They're small, consistent acts of community defense, and they matter. Sometimes I still walk by the cul-de-sac at midnight, listening to the sprinklers tick and the crickets hum. The houses are just houses again, not battlegrounds. The black SUV that once circled like a predator is long gone, replaced by the quiet comfort of minivans and pickup trucks. Silver Creek looks ordinary, and that's the beauty of it. Normal life is something you fight for, something you protect. Erica is older now. She doesn't remember the mannequin in her bed or the traps I set around the house. What she remembers are the block parties, the neighbors who became heroes in her eyes, and the feeling that she was safe because her dad and his friends stood tall. One day, when she's old enough, I'll tell her everything. I'll explain that courage isn't always about the battlefield. Overseas, it's about facing the threats that creep into your own backyard. And I'll tell her that unity, not fear, is what saved us. I've been asked if I'd do it all again, if I'd put myself in danger, bait the criminals, risk retaliation. My answer is simple: yes, every time, because this wasn't just about my house. It was about the principle that in America, no family should be bullied out of their home by fake authority. It was about proving that even in the age of digital scams and corporate fraud, truth and community still have teeth. There's one more moment I'll never forget. Months after the trials, I was standing in line at the grocery store when an older man approached me. His hands trembled as he gripped mine. "You don't know me," he said, voice breaking, "but I lost my house in one of those scams years ago. Watching your story gave me closure I didn't know I needed. You gave me back my faith." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Fighting back doesn't just protect your own, it ripples outward, touching lives you'll never even meet. So if you're listening to this story, take it as both a warning and a promise. A warning that predators can wear suits, carry clipboards, and call themselves associations. But also a promise that when neighbors unite, when ordinary people refuse to bow to intimidation, even the most organized schemes can collapse. Silver Creek will forever carry scars from that season. But scars aren't just reminders of pain. They are proof of survival. Proof that when criminals tried to turn our homes into commodities, we turned our neighborhood into a fortress of solidarity. And if they ever try again, they'll find the same thing Dawson, Marcus, and Griffith did. We are not prey. We are protectors. The American dream isn't just about owning a home. It's about defending it together. And that's exactly what we did.